I was afraid of almost everything as a child. I would see faces moving in the wallpaper at night. I would see snake-like branches. Lamps became heads. Piles of clothing became sagging corpses, and the front of cars gave me a menacing smile. I could hear them too. A groan would be the sound of a creaking door. The floorboards would sigh heavily and the wind would scream. Everywhere I looked, I saw monsters, ghosts, and ghouls. I must admit that I was an anxious child. It turns out that I have a problem, so it wasn't just an act of imagination. In essence, it is chronic hyperactive pareidolia. You know that phenomenon where you may perceive human shapes in trees or faces in cars? Pareidolia is that. Humans have developed the ability to recognize camouflaged animals, such as snakes and jaguars, and to recognize the sounds of approaching predators as a kind of protective mechanism. However, I find it to be roughly 16 times more obvious than the typical individual. I constantly see stuff everywhere. There were treatments, of course. I had tried 6 different regimens over the course of 4 years by the time I was 12, and the side effects were terrible. I would become agitated by some and hyperfocused by others. I was immediately put to sleep by one kind of drug. By the age of 18, I believed I would never find employment. I was barely getting by in school, and I had little chance of surviving college. I had these terrible tics while taking a course of medicines that hardly kept me together. My leg would fly out and trip me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, and I'd drop things. I was a complete wreck. My mom had to use grip tape to cover the handrail and steps. I had a regular Thursday meeting with the County Employment Services a few years back. I detested it. My mom had to take me there on a very terrible day since the medications were killing me. I nearly stumbled into a stone wall on the short walk to the workplace when she dropped me off at the end of the street. I knocked over a trash can because I was so agitated. However, I had an interview with a possible employer for the first job in a few years. She was just an elderly woman wearing a thick coat, and I didn't think much of her. She informed me she had heard a lot about me and introduced herself as Teresa. She offered me a large one-time payment as well as a trial. Although I was unclear about my responsibilities, she informed me that confidentiality was a requirement. She merely asked that I quit taking my medications. I accepted Teresa's offer even though I could still smell the filth on my jeans. I had no idea what to anticipate on my first day of work. I had hardly slept after going a week without taking my medications. I had a hard time understanding the world the way I had as a child. Faces might be seen almost anywhere, on the walls, in the shadows, in the leaves, in patterns. I would hear screams and voices and creaking floors, crinkling paper and every stopping car. I felt so jittery that I could hardly walk without flinching, and it was difficult to keep concentrated. I was picked up by Teresa in a gray car. She continued to glance at the GPS while wearing a headphone. I saw that she kept biting her lip and that her leg was jerking. During the entire ride, she hardly gave me a glance. Finally, after about 40 minutes of driving off the highway, we reached a little yard. There was a dilapidated, one-story prefab house from the 1960s and 2 big trailers, one of those things with similar shattered windows and cheap wood paneling. The yard contained 8 other cars, a bus, a Jeep, 2 vans, and 4 sedans. Spotlights, a command tent with laptops and an antenna, warning tape, and 6 boxes covered with blue tarps were all set up. Security guards in handcuffs, armed men brandishing assault rifles, and a few medical professionals waiting with stretchers and first aid kits. As soon as I got out of the car, I was surrounded. They attached a plastic ribbon to my left wrist, fitted me with a cardiac monitor, safety gloves, and a headset. Teresa continued to gaze around, a drop of perspiration stinging her eye. She questioned, "What are we looking at? 4? 3? Through the headset, I heard, "Just 1. We received it ahead of schedule. You got the job?" "On location," she answered. "Any blues?" "We're clear, no blues." At last, Teresa looked at me. With her hands on my shoulders, she turned to face me and said quietly, she remarked, "This seems like a lot. I only ask that you carefully enter and report back to me what you see." Waya, I inquired, "What's inside?" "I'm not sure," she sighed. "None of us are aware. However, we believe you can see it." "Is it risky?" She gave a headshake. "We're not sure. Our goal is to learn more about them." Instructions flew in all directions. They took multiple blood samples, snapped pictures of me from 6 different perspectives, and required me to sign a disclaimer. They examined my eyes, removed a sample from my tongue, and put on safety goggles. A few seconds later, Teresa grabbed them away from me. She said, "Nothing around the eyes. You must have clear vision." While they were doing some sort of test, they asked me to come to the door. Checks for weapons, systems, and readiness. We were firing a rocket, it seemed. My legs started to shake. Teresa responded through the headset. "I'm with you all the way. You are free to depart at any moment. Tell me what you see, please. And I mean what you see, honestly." The countdown started. The spotlights came on at 0, and the whole yard became a silent ghost town. Everyone held their breath. Now it was my time. I entered. A modest 1-story home, a kitchen, 3 rooms, and a bathroom. Clothes were still thrown over a chair in the living area, indicating that someone had lived there until recently. Even though there was no power, the faint spotlight streaming in through the windows gave me the impression that I was in a hospital waiting room. My heart was thumping violently. I had no idea what to anticipate, but this paycheck might give me the push I needed to move out on my own. 4 zeros on a paycheck for 1 day of labor. However, as I stood there and gazed into the immaculate living room, I began to have my concerns. "What do you see?" Teresa inquired. "Observe anything?" "Just furniture, nothing more. An ancient TV, a couch, an expensive carpet, etc. Nothing unusual. I simply strolled around, stating aloud what I observed." Teresa was growing irritated as the minutes went by. She remarked, "These are just things. Tell me what you actually see, please." I had this terrible sensation in the pit of my stomach as soon as I stepped into the bathroom. My ear was tickled by a sound. Something moving behind me caught my attention in the restroom mirror. I glimpsed a pair of blue eyes in a split second. I screamed as I turned around. Something shifted. I threw myself back and used the tips of my fingers to shut the restroom door. As I stumbled, I crushed a cockroach and tore down the shower curtains. I tried to remember to breathe while I lay there with my feet up in the air. I've rarely been so terrified that I had to remind myself to take a breath. Adrenaline tingled my fingers. "Explain what you observed," Teresa shouted. "What's inside?" "Blue eyes. Its eyes were blue." "Have you noticed where it went?" "I didn't. It was still outside the door as far as I could tell." "Take another look," she added. "Take another look, then leave." I needed her encouragement to get out of the bathtub. She pushed me on, encouraged me, and told me that I had to get out of that room. I could hardly feel my feet when they finally got me out of the tub, which probably took them 15 minutes. There was nobody there when I eventually opened the restroom door. There was nobody in the hallway. I walked out cautiously and looked around. Nothing. I felt foolish as I stood in the center of the living room. I was taking my prescription specifically to treat paranoia and unexpected panic attacks. I realized that perhaps the people outside and their preparations had an impact on me. I expected to see something when I walked in. Naturally, I was seeing things because they had agitated me. On the other hand, I hadn't noticed the strange painting on the wall before. It was the most peculiar thing. It was a painting from a thrift store that depicted two people crossing a bridge on a sweltering summer day. Although it was somewhat generic, I had been extremely watchful when I first took over. Have you ever had the experience of saying a word so many times that it begins to seem like a noise? That was the sensation that enveloped my eyes. Colors began to swirl as the image began to distort and vanish. I caught a glimpse of those blue eyes in that haze. On the sides of the bridge in the artwork, there were little blue dots in the water. I had seen a face there, and that was what I had seen. Something vanishing, blurring into my vision. For a brief while, I was positive that I had not seen this painting when I had initially entered. It was aware that I could see it now. I sensed it. I began to retreat gradually. I muttered, "There's something in the painting." In the living room. "Are you certain?" Teresa inquired. "Very sure." Definitely." "Leave." The floorboards creaked as I rounded the corner. The painting was out of view, yet I could still feel movement. I felt hands on my shoulder as I backed out the front door and stepped out into the crisp fall air. I was dragged back by armed guys while paramedics began using torches to examine my eyes. They inquired about my name, my mother's maiden name, and the president's name, among other private matters. As I heard a crew break into the house using stun guns, cattle prods, nets, and a crate, I was instructed to lay down. I just smiled and wept as I lay there and felt the strain go. Teresa was seated next to me, but I didn't even notice her. When I was handed a tablet and a cool drink, I took them without inquiry. "You performed well," she remarked. "You're finished. You're finished." What was that? What's inside? Something that only a unique mind can perceive. I had never worked with Teresa before. I would only be called in once or twice a month for the next 5 years, but the money I made from those few days was sufficient to leave my parents' house. Although I had to submit to routine checkups, and Teresa would check in with me once a week, I was usually totally unrestrained. I became somewhat more knowledgeable about the business I was employed by and their operations. Hatchet Biotechnica, a division of Hatchet Pharmaceuticals, began paying me. The title contractor, which was repeated like a name, was my formal title. Teresa began to give into more information about what to look for and how to behave, but that initial assignment served as a kind of trial to see how I fared. Although I had no notion what I was really proving, I believed that my propensity to recognize patterns and hazards aided me in my progress. I gained some additional knowledge about their processes. They insisted on checking for blues, for instance. This required searching the surrounding region for any infection, which typically manifested as discolored blooms. Blue usually, but not always. Usually sunflowers, sometimes tulips. They once discovered many teeth protruding from the wall. They would search for something blatantly odd and out of the ordinary whenever they checked for blues. The entire mission would be canceled if something similar was discovered, and the entire location would be destroyed using controlled explosives. They would use flamethrowers and pitch tents in more inhabited areas. I recall being called in to burn down a greenhouse with 6 men with flamethrowers the week before Christmas. The way the flames shone off their visors is something I will always remember. It all appeared to them to be flames. However, I noticed something else. Bodies were wreathing in the flames when I spotted them. Through the broken glass, I heard screams, and I would see hurt faces staring at me with vile black eyes in the burned remnants of melting plastic. I had done 33 cases in 2.5 years till a few months ago. In each instance, I would enter a place and search for 1 to 3 things that were concealed in plain sight. Until then, I was still unaware of their true nature. I occasionally saw a pair of blue eyes staring at me from the other side of the room, or caught a glimpse of something sprinting past me. I simply reported it and walked away each time. A seat, a refrigerator, an untrustworthy window. It used to be a music box. Hell. We were barely approaching a house this time when we arrived. The area was already prepared, and it was a soggy fall evening. One of the Jeeps that had made a wide turn knocked over a for sale sign, which I had spotted. I changed into my outfit, samples of blood, plastic wrap, etc. The plan was to make it simply another job. I was still anxious, but I was improving. "No blues?" Teresa inquired. One of the armed men replied, "None. One tango is what we're looking at." "Are you certain?" Teresa narrowed her eyes. "6, according to the first report. One is stated in the secondary reading. We may have runners." She sighed. "Notify the Galapagos? Start him hunting?" She tapped me on the shoulder and turned to face me. "You have this in and out." "I understand," I said again. "Yes." Procedure as usual. Game on, countdown, spotlights. It was similar to entering a stage. I felt like a hunter as soon as I stepped through the door and saw my shadow spread out over the floor. That whatever remained in this house made a sincere effort to conceal, and that I was the one to be afraid. I said, "The floor is crooked. Unusual location. Are you certain?" "Yes," I said, nodding. "Certainly." I regained my composure and began going through each area individually. I awaited the emergence of that sensation. I was able to glimpse the photo underneath the picture by looking past the obvious. The patterns of shadowy people become more distinct, and the blue eyes appear out of thin air. I could feel a primal part of me poking my nerves, expecting me to panic, yet it was enough to just relax and wait for that feeling to wash over me. However, nothing took place. I looked in the living room, bedroom, and kitchen, but nothing was there, only the echo of my own footsteps, a floor that was oddly slanted, and empty rooms. A single window in an empty guest bedroom. I saw frowning faces in the woods outside through it. I got nothing after 20 minutes. Teresa reassured me that we were still receiving readings from inside the house after I informed her. I hadn't seen anything, but I still had something in there. I repeatedly experienced cycles of wrath, anxiety, and denial. What had I been lacking? At last, I simply took a seat in the center of the living room floor. I groaned, scratched my eyes, and made an effort to calm myself. "I'm Teresa. I don't sense it. Are you certain?" No one answered. "Teresa?" "Yes," she said absently in response. "Yes, no, we're all right. Please wait a moment." "Are we okay?" I inquired. "What do you mean, that we're okay?" No answer once more. After 10 more minutes of stomping, I approached a window that overlooked the front yard. The spotlight's glare made it difficult to see. "Teresa, I'm going out. The location is deserted." 24 faces were staring at me as soon as I opened the front door. I had the impression that something else was going on, though perhaps they were taken aback to see me. I knew something wasn't right. Every one of them gave me a weird look. Some seemed neutral, while others are beaming. A paramedic simply gazed at me in slack-jawed horror. They seemed unsure of how to communicate their feelings or what they should be feeling. A hole appeared in my stomach. My eyes glazed over, giving me the hollow impression that I was looking at a fake object that was concealing a pattern. I was now experiencing the feeling I had been searching for within. Teresa was in the far back. She grinned broadly as she emerged from behind a Jeep. Her eyes, which were flashing a chilly blue, appeared behind the outline of her face. A blue glow sprang up in each of their eyes. My paranoid vision suddenly picked up on human-like figures in the grass surrounding them. Mauled, headless bodies. Counterfeiters, imitations, mimics, nightmare creatures who have deceived us. Smiles began to appear on their faces one by one, long tongues concealed between rows of impossible to sharp teeth, their necks lengthening, their fingers getting longer. They were taking off their disguises and coming straight at me without fear. No words were said aloud, nothing. However, it seemed to me that the wind itself was yelling for me to flee. I ran, slamming the door behind me. People were emerging from the walls, door handles that transform into hands and grab my clothing. My warped face was reflected with jawless smiles in mirrors and windows. I was unable to blink. My eyelids were forced open by a new horror with each heartbeat. I had forgotten how many doors there were. More windows than necessary were present. There were 4 refrigerators in the kitchen, and a skylight appeared out of nowhere. The master bedroom had been filled with countless paintings that showed gruesome, gory horrors. My mind was rushing to remember what was real and what wasn't, as they tried to encircle me already. Recalling that there was only one window, I hurried to the back of the guest bedroom. There were 2 now. I had to take a chance, make a guess, take action. I pictured fangs hitting my palms as I grasped the window frame. I feel tongues licking my palms. Their hunger was satisfied by broad smiles. This time, though, it was all in my head. I rushed into the woods after breaking through the window. Throughout the night, I simply persisted. My chest ached from suppressing the screams. When I wasn't taking my medicine, everything in the dark appeared to be attempting to grab me or eat me. Howling winds were screaming, and creaking branches were laughing. My foot became stuck between 2 boulders after what must have been hours of running. I watched them fall on me as I twisted my ankle and fell to the ground. I was scratched by their fingertips. I screamed as I writhed on the ground, pleading with them to simply release me. I only scratched myself on the underbrush, though, and discovered it after a few seconds. Nobody was there. I was secure. I sobbed while attempting to ignore the distorted visage that was reflected by the full moon overhead. I eventually headed home. I didn't have any mails to read. My work numbers had all been disconnected. There was no information about the company that employed me, and all means of communication had simply vanished. There is no address, no phone number, and no names associated with Hatchet Biotechnica. It just exists on paper. It's all a front. Teresa hasn't gotten back to me since. Whoever I've been working for, I believe, has simply thought I'm dead. I choose to share this anonymously so that people who are aware of who I am can get in touch with me, and I merely have a warning for those that don't. Pay attention. Have faith in your instinct. It could save your life. My daughter vanished almost 8 years ago. It seems like yesterday as I recall the morning I lost her. The front door was open when I woke up, before my husband. As I rushed to check my little girl's bedroom, panic shot through my veins. But Sarah was nowhere to be seen. She was 4 years old. Months passed while the cops sought. She was under an Amber Alert. We distributed hundreds of posters about missing people. Thousands of tips were called in, but none of them produced any useful information. I simply couldn't comprehend that we were experiencing it. How cruel might the world be? Naturally, I was destroyed. I hardly ate, and I had trouble sleeping. I was barely able to function at one point. I don't believe I could have survived it without my hubby. Even though I knew he was sad on the inside, he remained strong for me since he was my rock. We were unable to separate, and happily, he never lost it like I did. At least, not in front of me. He used to remark, "We'll get through this." "Do you believe she is still alive?" I inquired. "I'm not sure," he said after pausing. The idea that she was still alive but had to go through a terrible ordeal, or that she was gone entirely, I don't know which hurt more. My spouse didn't enjoy discussing it, and each time I brought it up, he cut me off. I guess everyone grieves in a different way. The adversity somehow made us closer. Most couples would be destroyed by this kind of misery, but it simply strengthened us. It was the way he supported me and helped me get back up when I was feeling low. I carefully considered my options and chose the ideal companion. I discovered I was pregnant once more a few years later. I was anxious since I thought I had failed before. Naturally, my spouse reassured me. As if it were a given, he declared, "This time will be different." My second daughter was born. In honor of her sister, we gave her the name Jennifer Sarah. I became aware of strange parallels between the two as she matured. They even shared comparable birthmarks on their cheeks, demonstrating how similar they appeared. Jennifer seemed to know some of Sarah's old toys when I took them out. She went so far as to name her dolls after her sister. They would even want me to read the same bedtime tale to them, and they shared similar tastes in food and television. I considered myself fortunate to have been given another chance. Compared to her father, Jennifer was closer to me. Naturally, he didn't mind because it allowed him more time to concentrate on his work. Although he was there as a father, he didn't much enjoy babysitting, as he would put it. In my opinion, he was overwhelmed by the similarities. Perhaps it hurt too much. However, I didn't mind. I appreciated that she wanted to spend all of her time with me, even though I know it's selfish. She once declined her father's invitation to go to the park. Instead, she wanted me to go. Something quite concerning occurred yesterday. Jennifer and I went to the park. It was surrounded by serene forests, which I liked, and had a sizable play structure, which she liked. She played just like Sarah did when I used to take her there, and I watched. I was distracted by a buzz on my phone as she started down the slide. When I took it out, I discovered it was a text message from my spouse. He wanted to know what we would be having for supper. I gave a brief response before turning back to the play structure. I was horrified to find my child missing. I promised that I had only briefly looked away from her. I said, "Not again," and started frantically looking for her. I called her name and ran through the woods in vain before I eventually located Jennifer. She was searching for something beneath a tree. I yelled, "Jennifer," and hurried over to her. Turning, she said, "Mommy?" She appeared concerned, and her hands were smeared in filth. "What were you contemplating?" I took her by the shoulders and said, "You have no idea how much you frightened me. Do you realize that you may have been harmed? Never again flee like that." "I apologize," she scowled. With a sigh of relief, I gave her a hug. "How come you're out here?" I asked. She indicated the pit she had begun excavating. Curious, I lifted an eyebrow and moved toward the tiny pit. I said, "Don't play in the dirt." "I must continue to dig." "I have to show you," she said. Tell me what?" "Mommy, you must see. Just keep digging. The hole is deep." I had no idea why, but I felt compelled to pay attention. When we got to the home, we picked up our shovel. "Would you like to remain here with your father?" "I'll be right back," I started. "Please don't abandon me, Mommy. I must be present," she begged. I gave in and said, "All right, but you have to stay right next to me. You really scared me. Don't run away." "I understand. I swear I'll be near you this time." We made our way back to the park together. We discovered the shallow hole Jen had excavated as we strolled through the woods. I started shoving at it. I'm not sure how long it took me to hit something. It might have taken hours. Little Jennifer followed instructions. I brought her some snacks and a sandwich, and she stayed close. I found something that was off-white. After dusting off the hard surface I had hit, I brushed the dirt away till I could see what I was seeing. There was a kid-sized skull in front of me. I noticed something gleaming in the light next to it. When I picked it up, I saw that it was a butterfly earring. part of a pair I had purchased for Sarah just before she vanished. "What the devil? What the hell is this?" I muttered. With a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in her lips, Jennifer began, "It's me, Mommy. That's where my father left me after putting me to sleep." But I'm not afraid of this job because of that. I know what to anticipate when I get to a house and see someone bursting out the front door with a rifle in their hand. They stand to lose something. They're afraid and unsure of what to do. So I tell them. I provide them the tools for retaliation. I direct them to pro bono legal firms, charitable organizations and government agencies that can assist people in getting back on their feet. I talk gently and sympathetically, and people pay attention. As they pack up and go, some even give me a thank you. Dealing with the suicides is more difficult. Every year, I receive at least 3 or 4, and those who commit themselves out of resentment certainly go all out for the show. The more difficult the cleanup is for the bank, the better. People also believe that the bank lists their home for sale as soon as it is seized, yet a house may be abandoned for years before I am called to inspect it. Swinging lone bodies in deserted living rooms, their flesh melting like candle wax from all that time spent outdoors. It makes me really sad. These individuals set up a cruel diorama, but nobody shows up. By the time I get there, the writing has faded and the blood has dried after they cut their necks while holding eviction notices. The worst offenders harm not just themselves but also others close to them. Although older people are more likely to make suicide pacts, octogenarians are not the only ones, families as well. Although it is uncommon, it does occur. They spent so much time in the dry autumn heat in a sun-baked house with drawn curtains that their skin became paper thin, lips that recede, a rictus grin with black, toothless gums. It's an incredible sight to behold peering out of a crib. Every home is apocalyptic in its own right. I can roam around its own wrecked city. The toilet cistern contains whiskey. Under the bed, fentanyl. Bills were past due. Furthermore, it goes beyond the individuals we expel. Since these areas remain vacant for so long, squatters frequently move in. Usually not harmful. Not all the time. There are some that can be absolutely deadly. Slashing box cutters furiously at the air, stringy men and women with flinty eyes and missing teeth emerge from interior tents and moldy old blankets. With all the defensive wounds on my forearms, you could play tic-tac-toe on them. The items people leave behind aren't quite secure, even after they've moved on. HIV-positive needles are hidden in the edges of used sofa cushions, ready to puncture inquisitive fingers, and fumes from do-it-yourself labs can damage your lungs. Additionally, the cooks enjoy setting up traps in their homes, since they get quite worried about being robbed. They come up with creative ways to use whatever is available. Glass fragments on broom handles that are spring-loaded. Floorboards can be tricked over razor blade boxes. Knives covered with shit concealed under fake windowsills. I occasionally come upon a trap that has been set off. Hair and blood oozing from the bent nails driven into the wood. A baseball bat poised to lash out at anyone entering the kitchen. There was only a grisly trail of gore leading out of the home and into the neighboring woods, with no sign of the stupid fool who set it off. The person who laid the trap is the most likely candidate. After passing out for days, these junkies go straight to their stash the moment they wake up, forgetting what they left behind. I once discovered the man laying a short distance from his own trap. He had placed this old metal lunchbox at the back of a cupboard to hold his money, giving anyone who reached inside a huge surprise. The blade entered at his elbow and exited just below his thumb's knuckle. No more assisting him. He passed away on the chilly linoleum of his late grandma, bleeding out. God, what a terrible way to go. What about his tiny lunchbox? On the dirt, devoid of everything valuable. According to the police, he was accompanied at the time. They must have become afraid, for they stole the money and abandoned him to perish. I wouldn't find him for a whole month, and during that time, nobody even filed a missing persons report. The child wasn't upset, unlike what you might have thought. He simply had a worried expression on his face. 19. Slowly dying and going through withdrawal. Holding his exposed wrist with one hand, he curled up like a baby. The ocean cannot be contained within your fist. Through your fingers, it seeps out. The child was aware of the impending event. His eyes showed it to me. Horrified, I'm very scared. Meth is an extremely potent substance. In the middle of nothingness, these wretched individuals burn their brains. What people believe they see out there is beyond my comprehension. What comes to them at night. I once came over this trailer that had been set up with almost 100 traps. They ringed the lone RV in the midst of the desert like an invading army made of knives, bear traps, stolen firearms, and even a few hurriedly built IEDs. They weren't very sophisticated, but they were numerous, savage, and desperate. It took a week for me and a bomb squad to reach the front door, but by the time we did, we were all pretty sure of one thing. This home hadn't been set up to deter burglars. The person who set the traps was afraid that something would escape. I suppose the concept that something was waiting for us in there got under our skin nevertheless, although it was probably just drug-fueled paranoia on the part of whoever set them. The entire site would occasionally go to hell when we received yelled reports of someone moving around in the trailer during the operation. Iron sights lined up on the main door, hands shaking, armed men and people lying on their bellies. We must have asked ourselves repeatedly what was in there that made someone so afraid that they set all these traps. As was to be expected, the first thing we discovered when we finally had an answer was a meth lab. A body that had been ripped to fucking pieces was less normal. It was scattered around the room, but after all that time in the heat, it was halfway to dust, ceiling, floors, and walls. Unless coyotes can work a lock and key, it would be impossible to claim that it was a natural death or the result of scavengers. He appeared to have been through hell based on what was left of his head and torso. Even though I'm not very knowledgeable in forensics, it seemed to me that he had passed very gradually and in agony. Fingers missing. Teeth. One eye was removed. What it reminded me of was torture. But what we discovered sitting on the kitchen counter with all those smashed beakers and discolored science supplies was even odd than all of that. A doll. Not like a doll for children, like a collectible that has seen better days. Oh, porcelain. Scared the living daylights out of me considering everything. I couldn't get rid of the impression that whomever set all those traps had that in mind. This raised the question of who the unfortunate man trapped in the trailer was. Furthermore, what had become of him? Police dismissed it. They say that meth is a really powerful substance. Everyone knew that. I wasn't so sure, though. I've witnessed a lot of strange things. Who knows what happened to that poor man so far from society, in the middle of nowhere? Many people live their lives in the world, away from prying eyes, on the plains, in forests, and among hills. My job gives you a sense of it. The enormous number of stories that remain untold, great victories, failed dreams, canvases left unattended, guitars that are in good condition, heydays that were intermittent or never occurred. The majority of stories have a beat. The majority. Some pose important questions, such as that doll. Others are more like nightmares waiting for the next victim than true stories. There are many hidden needles in our world that are just waiting to be probed. On rare cases, I will suggest that the bank not sell a property. They join a sort of no-go area that the government has established around the nation. I only saw pieces of this equipment in operation. Bureaucracy, in whatever form, is far above my pay grade. However, a mechanism for handling the worst of the worst has been put in place. Nor am I referring to ghosts. I haven't yet provided any examples that might qualify. It sounds terrible, I know. Clean the blood, scrub the brains, remove the shotgun pellets from the plaster by picking them up. It's okay. if the next family to move in has to deal with the ghosts of a few awkward drug users or irate previous owners. No, a location must be beyond recovery and pose an immediate risk to life in order to be considered a no-go. I'm referring to about factories that emit so much radiation that the government needs to construct a nuclear disposal site in order to provide a plausible cover. That is a bit of an extreme example, though. Most of the time, we condemn it and simply blame it on meth or radon gases. They had this one location. A family of 5 had lived in a farmhouse for almost 60 years. The parents had long since passed away, and the children were grown up by the time I arrived. So the kids had attempted to make the payments and had opposed selling the family house. In the end, however, the bank got its pound of flesh because they had their own debts. The house didn't appear too horrible at first sight. A little dilapidated, yes. However, I have minimal expectations. Cracked den low, the windows were still in place. Don't do any graffiti. The roof was not stripped. The satellite dish remained operational. The house seemed largely unaffected by anything but time and nature. From where I sat in my car, sloshing down a lukewarm bottle of water that had spent the drive tumbling around the passenger footwell. I had purchased some reliable exercise equipment so I could continue working out at home during the lockdown. After hours of becoming frustrated watching YouTube fitness videos at home, this finally happened. I missed the sensation of working out repeatedly in the gym, and starting my own home gym was the closest thing I could come to it. Due to the tiny size of my apartment, I was unable to put the equipment I purchased anywhere in my house. Either I had to move my bed outside or swap it out for the bench press. I am fortunate to have a covered driveway next to my house. The opportunity to work out normally was well worth parking my car on the street. Although I loved the setup and the gym equipment fit perfectly in the driveway, I discovered that I could only really work out at night under the low orange driveway lights because I had to work from home and meet deadlines. That's how my schedule came to be. I would typically go outside at 8 p.m., work out until 9:30 p.m., and then immediately go to bed. With the newfound flexibility of being able to work out in a gym a short distance away, I continued to push back my workout until 11 o'clock when I should have been getting ready for bed. On one of those late evenings, I suddenly realized how serious my error had been. I was listening to a horror podcast and was really absorbed when I felt like I was being watched. I had become accustomed to exercising in the dingy orange light while the leaves rustled in the gentle wind. I was genuinely at ease with the night, and the strange noises no longer made me jump. However, something wasn't right this time. I abruptly stopped listening to my podcast and felt vulnerable in the crisp night air for the first time. No one was in sight as I looked around, but that instinctive sense of danger persisted. It was really quiet on the street. Even though I've lived on that block for a number of years, it seemed odd that evening. Though they were only in my peripheral vision, I thought I saw long, black beings moving about everywhere. They appeared to disappear into the night as soon as I fixed my attention on them. That intense sense of being watched persisted, even if I was just being paranoid and making things up out of the shadows, like you do at night with strange objects in your room. I eventually attributed it to the effect of listening to a horror podcast at night, despite my urgent efforts to find the object that was watching me. I reinserted my headphones and tapped them to resume listening to the audio. There is nearly always someone observing you if you feel like they are. I put the podcast on hold. The article I was listening to did not include this. I played it again after rewinding it. The person's breathing was shallow and heavy, as if they had just finished a marathon. The source of those sounds was just out of sight, standing motionless on the brink of the curve. In addition to becoming paranoid, I was also beginning to hear things. Even though the podcast went on as usual, I remained tense, Sweat trickled down the sides of my face in beads, but it wasn't from physical activity. I jumped when I heard my friend Andy, who was standing next to me, say, "Dude, Ethan, are you okay?" I was astounded by his unexpected appearance in front of me and gaped at him. I was beginning to doubt what I was seeing, and my mind was beginning to unravel. I required medical assistance. I began to reflect about what might have led to these kinds of hallucinations. Did I knock my head by accident? Andy chuckled and waved his hand in front of my face. Then, when I didn't start laughing with him, his face abruptly changed to one of concern. "Are you okay, mate?" he inquired. My stomach started to tighten up when he was around. "Yes, where did you come from?" I questioned, still attempting to make sense of the situation. A deep sense of fear had taken the place of the feeling of being watched. Now that I was perspiring so much, I was thinking about going inside and calling for help. Clearly something was amiss. Was it with me, though? Or was something terrible on the horizon? "I approached you, but you appeared to be sitting motionless and oblivious," he remarked. It began to make sense. I didn't notice him approaching me since I was too preoccupied with my own anxiety and concerns. I even considered inviting him inside, but I changed my mind when the one question that had been bothering me became more pressing. I questioned in a hesitant tone, "Andy, why are you here in the middle of the night?" Andy gave me a half-shadowed glance. Andy wasn't typically like this, so something wasn't right with him. I took my phone out of my pocket, dialed 911, and then put it back. Andy didn't appear to respond. Instead, he kept his inscrutable expression on my face before responding. He said, "I just wanted to see how you were doing." "Why are you acting so weird, Ethan?" By overemphasizing the middle sounds, he mispronounced the word weird. He seemed to have malfunctioned, like a computer. The scar on his ring finger had disappeared when I turned to look at his hand. When we were teenagers and went camping, he had contracted it from an insect bite. Now that I was just brave enough to speak, I inquired, "Andy, what happened to the scar on your finger?" He grinned as he glanced at his hand. I realized then that his face also appeared strange. Someone was attempting to pass for Andy, not him. Not only would Andy never visit in the middle of the night, but he also always had a scar on his finger, so he wouldn't act that way. His voice was distorted, as if his vocal cords were being pulled, as he said, "I never had own. Calm down, Ethan." His face contorted into a mad smile that stretched from ear to ear as he extended his hand in my direction. Everything happened slowly. I should have reacted less forcefully if I had been in the right frame of mind at the moment, but my actions were influenced by my deteriorating mental state and will to live. I swiftly grabbed a metal weight that was lying directly beside me and gave Andy the worst possible slap across the face. His face was now pressed in and distorted as he flew back. He let out a loud shriek as thick yellow liquid, rather than blood, poured out of his orifices. My head ached from the shriek and my eardrums almost burst. Until we both heard sirens in the distance, Andy continued to stare at me. Before the yellow liquid that had been dripping out of him abruptly changed a deeper redder color, he gave me a smile. When the cops halted in front of my house, he lay down on the floor and closed his eyes. The remainder was a haze. They believe I'm insane and that I experienced a psychotic episode brought on by seclusion. Despite their blindness, they are considering diagnosing me with capgras hallucination. They fail to notice it. Something among us is taking our place. It might be your husband, parent, friend, or child one day, but they are trying to get beyond us. The individual who was just admitted to this mental health ward wrote the letter above. He often claims that his acquaintance who came to see him was a fraud. In a violent outburst, he almost killed his companion, and we are positive that he is suffering from psychosis. But when I encountered Andy on the way home today, he didn't appear to be suffering from the terrible injuries he sustained the night before. Something among us is gradually taking our place. That made me think for a while. I regret not following my instincts, which told me that it was strange that a remote home had remained unoccupied for so long. Taking the keys the sheriff had given me, I entered in the hopes of finding a simple job. After 3 hours, I was crawling out of a kitchen window that I had broken, my skin and clothes ripped to ribbons. With my eyes focused on the vacant window frame I had just escaped from and my chest almost bursting from the hammering of my heart, I staggered to my car. With the strong sun in my eyes, I could hardly see the lone person, but it was too big to be a ghost. My injuries were evidence of that. I sat in the waiting area and attempted to phone the previous owners after the doctor had done bandaging me, identifying the siblings. One by one. If anyone knew what I was getting into, I wanted to know what had attacked me. If so, there would be hell to pay. The first to respond was the eldest son. I didn't immediately throw myself into it. I paused before bringing up the basement and asked thoughtful inquiries. When I mentioned it to him, he laughed, told me that as a child he detested coming down there because he would hear the strangest sounds, such as a moan. They all believed that a ghost dwelt in the darkness down there, and their father had made this ghost more pronounced to prevent them from harming themselves or playing with inappropriate objects. Given it a name, he called her Marion. Living in the basement, Marion hid among the boxes of old clothing and pictures. She was hiding behind the partially dismantled lawnmower, constantly darting to the shadowy areas just out of your line of sight. Marion wore a gaunt flour sack dress and had long fingernails. She had a thumb-sized wart, a sharp nose, and black lips. Marion would crawl up the stairs with arms as long as her body and slink into their bedrooms, using the shadows as cover if she knew that there were 3 bite-sized children living just above her. She would begin by taking tiny bites out of any bare feet that were left hanging in the cold. "How about that freezer? Have you ever used it?" I inquired. "Oh my God, no!" he exclaimed. As children, we assumed that freezer was where Marion lived, so we avoided it at all costs. Even now, that basement still gives me the shivers. It simply remained in the back, looking ancient and forgotten. When we were younger, I believe Dad would go hunting and store the meat there. However, he phased that out before I was 5 years old. I didn't tell him what I had discovered in the house after my examination because he looked honest. He was unaware that there was a false wall and basement number 2 behind that freezer, made it home. God knows how the father dug it out and created a quiet, soundproof area without anyone noticing. A compartment around the size of a normal jail cell was hollowed out. The furniture was purposefully worn out, one mattress leaning against a single wall. The foundation was fastened with an iron shackle. A chair for a dentist that has been altered with restraints. A stain to a patch in the corner gathered into a hazy Rorschach blob of old browns and almost greens that spread outward. There was texture to it. That stain was familiar to me. I had previously watched it, residue that remains after experts have completed removing a dried-out body from a hard surface. I initially thought that the stain's source had been moved. Even footsteps were present. However, they didn't appear correct. They made me sick for some reason. The residue had not contained them. It was what they were made of. Down there, someone or something covered in that gunk has been stomping around. The inspection had been routine and uninteresting up until that point, but discovering a secret dungeon isn't something you come across every day. Now, all of a sudden, I was told a really strange and incomprehensible family secret. I spent a solid minute standing there attempting to fit the puzzle pieces together. Had someone wandered around leaving a trail after moving a corpse and becoming coated in decaying flesh? Why had they done it without shoes? And then, why not clean it up? And how could they have been both? So untidy and yet neat. No drag marks could be found. Something in me soured when I looked at those prints again. Little feet. A female's. This is a well-known story. Don't force me to explain it. A basement at a remote location. Limitations. A man of the family whom nobody questions. He had hunted successfully. Fuck off. Who, then, had perished in the cellar? Who were those prints left by? Nor were all of them on the ground. I followed a few to the wall, where they mounted the vertical surface, and then continued upward and onto the ceiling, with a hand that was getting shakier. Then, like icy water, a strong feeling of the uncanny washed over me, and a cold perspiration formed on the back of my neck. The yard's tree boughs moaned as the wind blew somewhere overhead. Sounds from a different planet. In my imagination, I could see it up there, and not too far away, and the shadow was my automobile. Those pictures seemed to come from a different reality. I want to go back on it, to get out of this filthy little hole. I just needed to leave that basement and get for my car. However, I wasn't entirely certain that I wanted to move. The idea that the growing fear I was experiencing was all in my imagination made me feel as though I may shatter something fragile. Nothing more than the result of an overactive imagination. Nevertheless, I had the impression that if I attempted to flee, the nightmare would follow me into the real world. I even made an effort to convince myself that I had no idea what had transpired in that room. Probably not. He and the wife might have played a game together. I glanced back at the chair, though. The leather of old straps was frayed and cracked. Some of them had teeth marks on them. I inhaled deeply and got my legs under control again. I turned and started to walk, since I had to presume that I was alone down there unless I saw something alive. Look ahead. The multitude of tiny creaks and groans that seemed to follow me from shadow to shade made my mind harden. Even though I begged myself to stop, I couldn't help but fill in the details of that basement's past. Perhaps she was the first to pass away. Perhaps he did. Perhaps he chose to end it all because he was bored and left her to starve, or perhaps he almost got caught. Perhaps she murdered herself by snatching something sharp. However, she died undoubtedly and remained dead for a very long period. For such type of liquefaction, at least a few months are needed. She became less cohesive. Skin, muscle. Blood is similar to the mold plug that grows on top of stale coffee. I had a mental image of her collapsing, a time-lapse of claymation, a riot of hues. The normal cycle just ruptured somehow. She didn't entirely disappear. Furthermore, nobody showed up to take her away. Didn't those prints on the ceiling, walls, and floor belong to her? She reclined. She passed away. Then for some reason she stood up again. I was so terrified that I started to perspire by the time I got to the top of the basement stairs. So far, all I've seen along the route are old boxes, crates, and antiquated pieces of junk, along with leaf blowers and weed whackers covered in cobwebs and faded logos. However, that didn't imply I was alone myself. There was a problem with somewhere. I sensed it. A heat that radiates, a strong sense of animosity, even when nothing appears to be genuine. It was so horrible that I really experienced a childlike sense of relief as I opened the door. It was similar to the rush you get when you go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and are certain that a ghost is standing inches behind you. I chuckled. And my ankle was wrapped in something hard and icy. As if reaching directly out of the imaginary world and into the real one, a hand had extended up between the stair slats. With my heart pounding like thunder in my ears, I gazed down and gradually started to piece together what I was seeing. The hand came first, growled, dark, like a poorly drawn shadow that was only apparent because it was illuminated by the light from the open door. Then beneath it, in the shadow, was a skull-like face wrapped in a rubbish bag, the material pulled taut to reveal a gaping mouth and the outline of empty eyes. I had anticipated something more somber, like something from a poor horror film. The truth was that whatever was in that basement had changed in an odd way. I can't say for sure what it was like because I only ever saw pieces of it. However, it certainly didn't resemble a ghost, a corpse, or anything else I had ever seen, or believed I had seen, in movies or in real life. I reacted like a child when I saw the bogeyman, who seemed like the real deal. I let out a strange, muted cry of terror and tore my leg off so fast that I startled myself and managed to escape. However, whatever lurked beneath those stairs moved swiftly. It had gotten out of its hiding spot, mounted the steps, and was already pushing me to the ground before I could move another step. Marion was wearing a flour sack outfit, which was the last thing I saw before my chin hit the kitchen floor. This odd tidbit slipped past me unnoticed at the time. However, in retrospect, the son's later recollections of that specific article of apparel persuaded me that his father was the one who had created that secret cellar. When the family moved in, it wasn't as if it had been lying unnoticed. Furthermore, the father must have been a complete jerk for include such a graphic detail in a narrative he told his children. He had probably done it so that his children would immediately scream for their life and flee if his prisoner ever managed to escape and they spotted her. Naturally, I was unaware of any of this at the time. I knew very little about what had attacked me. Definitely something unpleasant. Something that had resurrected after dying in that terrible room. She was furious for crying out loud. She howled like a banshee struck by a car, pinned me, and knelt on my back. The sound and the sense of powerlessness made me sulk. I realized that this was a nightmare from which I was unable to awaken. I couldn't see the fingers she used to work on my back, but I could feel the intense pain of the tattoo needle. It was over in a matter of seconds. I had enough pain to have me have spasms that knocked her to the ground. All I wanted was that brief moment of independence. Crawling to my feet, I leapt out of the closest window. I could care less about whatever cuts I might get. You wouldn't have either if you were able to experience what I did. They weren't scratches. My wounds resembled those of a boxed jellyfish, the type that after a million hypodermic needles have transformed the flesh into a porous sponge, causes the muscle underneath to wilt and wither, according to the doctors. I needed skin grafts. They were unable to remove the remnants of my flesh from the leather seats, so I had to sell my car. My back still looks like it was hit by a lawnmower. Putting my top on every morning still hurts. They're not even the worst of my wounds for some reason, only the largest, the most noticeable. At least it was simple to persuade the bank not to sell because of those scars. Normally it takes a lot of work, but after reading the doctor's reports, they decided to fully condemn it and transfer the land to whatever odd government agency deals with this kind of situation. The house in question has been abandoned to deteriorate. It cannot be reclaimed from Marion by any document, deed, or mortgage payment. All we can do is turn it off. I can only hope that no one else is foolish enough to ever return to the property because it is walled off and has so many warnings warning of poisonous gas plastered on every window.